Ladies and gents, what's going on? It's Breacher. Well, so many people asked me after I did the Prot Warrior Mythic Hellfire Assault video, could I do something similar for other bosses inside Hellfire Citadel, as it gave kind of lots of little tips about what I was actually thinking and going through as a tank while doing that fight. So I thought, yeah, cool, no problem with me. Not going to do it for every boss, because a lot of them just make sense commonly, right? You're tanking a boss straight up, nothing's tricky there. But I will cover this one. This is Heroic Archimonde. Heroic Archimonde. Now, I will say this. As a tank, your role is different here. Your tank role on Archimonde is not difficult, it's even on Heroic. Archimonde itself doesn't hit hard enough to really be a big threat. Standard stuff will keep you alive without much of an issue. He's certainly no Mr. Blackhand. But what you can do is some minor things to increase DPS. So this is a raid fight. And what I mean by that is, as a tank, your job is to shut the fuck up and get on with your job, because everybody else is dealing with way more stuff than you are. And it's important that you understand, and there's a lot of ego that flies around with tanks, that on occasion, you just need to shut your fucking mouth and just get on with what you're doing. Okay? You look at any of the big recent Mythic boss kills, you notice the tanks say barely anything. And the reason for that is they shouldn't be. It's the raid that's dealing with all the complicated stuff. It's not every fight that's like that, but this is one of those fights. That being said, there are little tiny ways of increasing the raid's DPS on Archimonde, and it's going to be passively. Not only that, you can passively, without even them realizing it, you can lower the damage they take. And there's a few instances of that going on here. I will point out as a side note, is my assignment here is not just to tank, but also to call out the shackles. So I was basically focused on that, because the tanking of the fight is not too difficult. What are our major threats for tanks, for those of you coming up to this fight, is the Death Caller, the Death Brand. Okay? It's a debuff thrown out by Archimonde. This is very important that you realize this, is the actual Death Caller doesn't do that much. His melee is incredibly weak, and his shadow volley, or whatever the fuck it's called, barely does anything. It works in conjunction with the debuff you get. So you get two debuffs. You get one that increases your shadow damage taken, and you get the Death Brand. Now, the Death Brand does loads and loads of damage, and it will continue to do damage until it dies. So you can reduce that, at least as a warrior, you can reduce that with Demoralizing Shout, because the debuff actually comes from Archimonde. I don't know whether you know that. So if you put the Demoralizing Shout on Archimonde, you actually take less damage from it. So very cool. It's also magical damage, so using a lot of shield barriers and stuff there. What you'll see throughout the fight is, in terms of my personal cooldowns, if you're interested in that kind of stuff, they're all on the Death Caller. I'll be using things like Last Stand with my 4-set bonus, which gives me huge shield barriers. I'll be using Demoralizing Shout. I might use my Legendary Ring. I'm not entirely sure if I even bothered using it here, because it's kind of overkill. We'll be doing all those kind of things here, and along with Enraged Regeneration, while I've got about 950,000 health with Last Stand, so my Enraged Regen is ticking for quite a lot as well. And all that should essentially, it's overkill, a little bit, it's a little bit overkill, but it will in fact nullify all the damage from that pretty much and make me a non-essence, which is my job here. As I said, this is a raid fight. The tanks should be making themselves a non-issue. Like, nobody needs to worry about the tanks. Everything passively is going to happen. A couple of things that we'll be doing in terms of positioning is we don't use the ping pong tactic. The tactic we use is to do a loop around the room. So we'll be timing that loop, so when we push into phase 4, which is the Banish phase, that the Allure of Flames is off to one side, and we want to finish up round about where he spawns, because that's where all the adds will spawn, which means they will die much quicker, allowing us to make the push into phase 4 much easier. That's going to be down to the tanks to make sure that we move the boss accordingly with the Allure of Flames in order to end up in that position. So we'll be moving a lot and a little, just adjusting it here and there. So I've said enough now. Let's get into the fight in 3, 2, 1. Off we go. So the monk is going to start tanking here. So I'm going to do the usual Berserker Rage, pre-pot, and off we go. What you'll notice is that I hold back my talents, which are Dragon Roar and Bloodbath, okay? These are specifically chosen for this fight, as all talents should be. And you'll see I hold back on the Sudden Death, pop Bloodbath, and that's because I'm going to use them on the first Doomfire, yeah? I'm going to get the Dragon Roar and the Execute, that Sudden Death Execute, and of course the Bloodbath on that. And that's going to allow it to kind of bleed over into the Doom Caller. So there it is. So we make the tank swap at the Doom Caller. So right now the monk is taking a lot of damage. So what you'll see is I taunted Archimonde, got my shield block up. I'm actively tanking Archimonde, but all my offensive damage is going into the Death Caller because it's far more dangerous. So here comes the Allure. Moving it away. Now, I move ever so slightly here. I don't move a long way compared to what I used to do. And I had 60 rage built up in order to make sure I had block when he arrived. Now, the reason I don't move a great deal there is because that Desecrate nearly always lands there. And I want to keep moving further back so that the melee don't have an issue with it whatsoever. Now, when Doomfire spawns, you'll notice here I put the Doomfire on Archimonde's left leg. Good reason for this. One, the Doom Spirit always goes on a range, which means the fire will be traveling out from his left, away from the melee. And also that then, by pointing on its left leg, means the melee can stand in between Archimonde and the Doomfire, get no fire debuffs, and cleave away merrily without being in any fear. If you put the Doomfire sort of in between Archimonde's legs, like under his nutsack, you'll tend to see that the melee take a lot of fire damage, yeah? Because they're just trying to cleave and get things down. They're killing their priority target. So by putting the Doomfire on his left foot, that means that the fire will travel away from the melee, and the melee can easily cleave. Excuse me. So, going here, we're just doing our offensive DPS. Essentially, we're doing our offensive DPS, and I'm waiting for this Doomfire to spawn. You'll notice that sometimes I cap out my rage, and that's basically because I'm either about to burst something more important than Archimonde, or I'm about to taunt, so therefore I need to do that. So we had a phase transition here, which means that we're making adjustments now. This was actually an early phase transition. In our previous attempts, we didn't have one of our mages who turned up at the last minute. And what that means is that we had another Allure of Flames at that point. Now, we didn't get it now. So this is earlier than the position I would like to be in order to, like I said earlier, arrive in that loop. So we're going to adjust how far we travel now with Allure of Flames. Very simple idea. Very, very cool. So now what we're doing is just maintaining our rage, jumping around because it increases your tanking, as you well know. I'm calling out the shackles now and just trying to plan that because I don't have much else to do here, and getting ready for Deathbrand. While doing this Deathbrand, you'll notice I don't switch to pure offensive. One, the Deathcaller is kind of far behind, and I'm about to move the boss for Allure. So I drag it over to the left here a little bit, okay, just ever so slightly, and this is just because I'm trying to create enough room between here and his original spawn point so that we can do a couple of Allures of Flames and finish up just before the phase 4 push round about his doorway in order to get the ads. Okay, nice simple idea. I'm about to get death branded, so I'm always managing here my rage to make sure I kind of go into the death brand with as much rage as possible. I could take a couple of unmitigated hits from Archimonde, no big deal, because the main threat is about to appear, right? That's the general thinking behind it, is the main threat is about to appear, so I'd rather have my rage for that, and here it is. So straight in, use last stand, enrage regen on, big shield barriers. You can see how my health spikes there so heavily. Probably took a couple of extra hits from Archimonde at the same time, but this is so painful, this thing. And no doubt in Mythic, this thing absolutely wrecks. So I instantly stick a skull on it, especially now the ads are here. You can see now, while the ads are coming, we get into position here. So the ads basically spawn on Archimonde's feet, which means they're being instantly cleaved. It makes interrupting much easier. Just going to pick up this ad, bring it over to the melee to get into the cleave. Statues down as well from the monk, just to try and make sure that all a little bit easier. But still, once again, you can see capping out rage. Why? Deathbrand's about to occur, right? There's Deathbrand. I wanted to go into Archimonde with a block up, so I'm a non-issue. Again, always going back to that idea that as a tank here on this fight, I'm trying to make myself as unimportant as humanly possible. All I'm going to do is make sure the position is nice and juicy and judge based on HP. We're about to push into phase 4, so I don't need to move it where I would ordinarily only move this a little bit so we get another ad spawn near his legs. Now I'm moving into our banish position and getting ready for doing that. So we're going to handle banishes in a couple of ways. I'm going to go in with phase 1 and we're basically going to send the whole raid in minus like 4 DPSs or 3 DPSs in order to kind of melt this, melt the ad inside as quickly as possible and then come out for the big bloodlust as we go into the big push. So you'll see most of the DPS coming here. This is also really nice because of the positioning that we did that loop in. I know not everybody uses the loop position, but it brought us into a place where all the DPS were very close to the banished spots that we would like ideally. So coming into here, you can see this HP is melting. I'm going to do the first interrupt. Somebody's got a backup. There's loads of raiders in here, so interrupting it's no big deal. All I'm doing as a tank is making sure people aren't stood in Rain of Fire. If I see a Rain of Fire spawn, I'll move it. Of course, it spawns the second I believe it dies. Oh, yeah, there it is, but it's dying, so it's no big deal. Whole raid out. So, as we move through this fight is extremely stressful. There is no other point during this fight where it is more important to be unimportant as a tank. Again, I can't stress it enough, and a lot of tanks don't let their ego go. You're just a tank here. That's all you are. You're just somebody who is incredibly unimportant. What I need to manage here is, one, is the position of the boss relative to the banishes, so that the ads that spawn there have a good some distance to travel between here and the raids. And I also need to pick up one Infernal, but not the other, obviously, because they heal if they're close. But what I'm asking my raiders and coordinating with them, preferably before the pull, is to ensure that what they're doing is keeping them close enough so I could taunt one in. So what I'd asked is the melee stay on the boss, essentially. Stay on the boss, and what I'll do is I'll bring the adds in. Just the casters just multi-dot up, and I will bring an add in one at a time for the melee to finish off. That means that people stay spread for the demonic feedback, which AoEs everybody, and the Infernals will eventually die. So you can see I'm just constantly kind of doing little left and rights. I'm judging it. I'm trying to keep both those banishes directly behind the boss and a solid distance. Okay, all the time I'm making shackle calls here, so no big deal there, just trying to coordinate the shackles to make sure that the best order of people is picked. So, like, the add-on picks bad people, in my opinion. One of those guys is a healer. I would rather have the healer go last. That tends to mean they're more aware of their raid frames, so less people die to shackle, which, if you've ever done this fight, will know that shackle is a pain in the ass. And what we're going to do now is the suicide mission. So it's the end of the fight, essentially, for me as a tank. Although this is a suicide squad, it's picked specifically. It's me and 2 warlocks, and the reason for this is, 1, I can survive in there without a healer, and so can the warlocks. So although it'll take us a long time to kill this, the boss should be dead, but if the boss isn't dead, we're likely to kill this ad before we go back out, because the warlocks aren't going to die. I'm not going to die. It's going to be a piece of piss, dead easy, but luckily the boss does go down, and you can see with relatively minor casualties to the raid. Why? Just coordinating things. And being a tank, tanking here and being unimportant, is, I can't stress it enough, is that you should really focus on not being an issue. So I hope that helps out any of the raids, or the tanks specifically for Heroic Archimonde. I hope you guys get it down. Enjoy. It's a very difficult boss, far more difficult than Mythic Hellfire Assault, at least, depending on the item level. Fun times. But there you go, guys. Mythic Archimonde. Heroic Archimonde. I'll see you again. Bye-bye.